Have a little one's birthday coming up? Fat Brain Toys has unique, age-appropriate gifts that really stand out. For over 21 years, this family-run business from Omaha, Nebraska has been creating toys that entertain and educate. They offer child-driven play experiences that keep both the mind and the body active, with options to shop by age or to use their gift bot for recommendations. Like the Plip Kit, perfect for the young builder, architect, or maker who can use the flexible pieces to create cool patterns and designs. Or my personal favorite, Mr. Bendy, a bendable figure with posable arms, legs, eyes, and wax bendy sticks that offer a fun way for kids to explore social and emotional learning. These durable, screen-free toys promote open-ended play, perfect for creative, differently wired kids. I also love the story of how Fat Brain Toys started. Mark Carson built the company after his 10-year-old son Adam couldn't find magnetic building toys online, and the rest, as they say, is history. Today, their website even features a resource center to help parents of neurodivergent and disabled kids find the best toys for their needs. Go to www.fatbraintoys.com/tilt to get 10% off all the items in the Tilt collection when you use the code TILT at checkout. And find out for yourself why Fat Brain Toys is a smarter way to play.
Because every single parent out there is trying their hardest. It's just that a lot of us are carrying way more weight in our own childhood experiences, our own mental illness, the other burdens we experience in our life, domestic violence, household dysfunction, whatever's happening with us. But I've never, ever met a kid that I'm like, oh, it's too late. Yeah, I think it's a really powerful point about if you are ever reading something or listening to something or thinking, I've stuffed things up, you haven't. It's always repairable. Once again, you talk about this. You just lean in and be led by the child and think about, what does this kid in front of me need?
I'm Debbie Reber, and welcome to Tilt Parenting, a podcast featuring interviews and conversations aimed at inspiring, informing, and supporting parents raising differently wired kids. My fall season is officially starting today, and I'm kicking it off with a conversation with Dr. Billy Garvey on mental health. Billy, a developmental pediatrician with over 20 years experience working with children in Australia, and I met last year when he was traveling around the world on a fellowship to explore the connection between how children are parented and their mental health as adults. One of the outcomes of that fellowship is Billy's new book, which is called 10 Things I Wish You Knew About Your Child's Mental Health, which he was kind enough to send me an advance copy of. So I wanted to bring him onto the show to talk about that, but really to expand on that initial conversation I had with him so that you could all be a part of it too. We cover a lot of ground in this extra long episode, including challenges of accessing mental health support in Australia, the need for true inclusion and what that actually means, the importance of unconditional love for kids, attachment, temperament, the role of self-esteem, and the limitations of certain diagnoses, and much more. Billy brings a unique lens to his work on child development and mental health, including his personal story of navigating a difficult childhood and being that quintessential bad kid who was kicked out of high school. As a senior specialist at one of the largest tertiary pediatric hospitals in the world, Billy works with families, conducts research, and trains clinicians and other professionals working with kids. He's passionate about reassuring parents that there is no such thing as a bad child. Through his work at the clinic, his new book, and his pop culture podcast, it's a great listen, by the way, definitely check that out, Billy is doing what he can to help parents and caregivers understand the foundations of good mental health so we can help our kids thrive at any stage in their development. Again, this is a longer episode, but it's so full of care and hope for all the kids who are struggling and the parents who want to do right by them. I hope you enjoy it. Here is my conversation with Dr. Billy Garvey. Hey, Billy, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Debbie. It's really nice to be chatting with you.
Yeah, same. The last time we chatted, I was going to say it was over pie. I don't think I had pie, but did you have a piece of pie?
Yeah, I did actually, off your recommendation in a beautiful cafe in Brooklyn. It was lovely.
Yeah, 4 and 20 blackbirds, which my child and I are missing dearly. But I would love if we could start by you kind of telling us a bit about your story and how you and I even came to know each other, because I think what you've gone through over the past couple of years in your own exploration and investigation is so interesting.
Yeah, so I'm a developmental pediatrician in Melbourne, Australia. I'm also very fortunate to be a parent of 2 gorgeous kids. And in my work, I've been working with families for over 20 years, over 2 decades. And I really, really love it. I feel like you're like this. It's just such a privilege to our own kids and share supporting other kids in the community. But our wait list is really long. It's over 2.5 years. And Australia, similar to other places in the world, has really high rates of mental illness in kids from a very young age to entering adult life. And it's really hard to get help. So I was very lucky that in 2018, I applied for a fellowship to travel around the world and learn how we can better share all the evidence and theory and science of child development and mental health more broadly and get help to families sooner. And that is how I got to meet you, because I knew of your book and your podcast and things like that. And was very lucky that you made time for me. And a lot of your fellow professionals in this space and kind of people that have been really powerful voices for advocacy, I was very lucky. And then I came back and I have a podcast that's part of a social enterprise called Guiding Growing Minds. It's called Pop Culture Parenting. And I've just written a book, which is called 10 Things I Wish You Knew About Your Child's Mental Health. And they're kind of really, in the same way as your work, trying to ease the burden and help provide guidance to those that are supporting kids in the community. And especially, like, it wouldn't mean anything to listeners outside of Australia, but I grew up in a town that's quite notorious for being fairly rough. I was brought up by a single mum who was waitressing and working full-time, raising my 3 brothers. Neither of my parents finished high school, and then I got kicked out of high school. So I really feel for those people that are finding it really hard, because my mum wasn't a bad parent. She was an amazing parent, but she just didn't get the support that she needed. And so it's this real privilege now that I've been fortunate to gain skills and experience from all the kids and families I've met to be helpful. And that's really what I'm trying to do, just really help and make it a bit easier for lots of people.
Yeah, I think that's what struck me when we met. And I think it was Tina Payne Bryson who initially connected us as well. Had such wonderful things to say about you and your heart and your commitment and passion for this. And that's just something I appreciate so much in your work, is this, you see such a strong need and you feel so strongly pulled to be a part of the solution. And I just find that really awesome to hear.
Well, yeah, I mean, Tina's amazing, and like you, is just doing this amazing work about trying to guide families. And I feel like I'm a really small player in the lives of the kids and even those that read my work, because I'm inspired by all the parents. And like I did my PhD with primary school teachers, and the stuff that they do every day is amazing. Like, as you know, it's not unique to be passionate about this stuff, because so many people are, and they're doing amazing stuff in the community. I'm fortunate to be in a privileged position where I can do it and I get to do it. And yeah, it's just so much fun. And meeting yourself and Tina and a lot of your colleagues and people in this space was a real highlight last year.
Yeah, it's like people who do this work are the most generous, lovely people that, like, I'm so grateful that my career has brought me into these spaces as well, because people who do this work are the real deal. I actually want to go back, if you don't mind. You mentioned that you got kicked out of school, and you talk about that in your book and in a chapter about bad kids. Would you be willing to talk a little bit more about how you went from being identified or kind of maybe self-identifying as a bad kid to your success now, right? You're a doctor. You made that journey. And I think for so many of us raising kids who might have that label, it's inspiring to hear what that journey could look like.
Yeah. They're my favourite kids to meet in clinic. Every Wednesday morning, we run a clinic at the biggest public hospital, kids hospital in the country, one of the biggest tertiary pediatric hospitals in the world. It's the behaviour clinic, and it's all these kids from a very young age that are having a really hard time and have often been told or feel like they're a bad kid. And it's this really privileged opportunity to hear that story, but then change that narrative. And I think your book talks about this in Differently Wired, about how do we accept and lean into who the kids that we're supporting are, not like who we want them to be. And I think for me, I was just really struggling, and I still struggle, and I've got a sensitive temperament, and I've always had one, I always will have one, and I just bucked against everything. You know, I was that kid that was just didn't feel like he fit in, so I was hostile. I didn't have secure self-esteem. I was really emotionally reactive. I wasn't great at learning. I didn't feel good about myself at school, and so I kind of lent in almost to that bad kid narrative, and I was like, I'm going to be the troublemaker. I'm going to be this person because it's safe and predictable and something I can do. And yeah, when I got kicked out of school, none of the other schools in the area would take me either. And it looked like I wasn't going to be able to finish my formal secondary schooling. And then I just had this beautiful meeting with a school principal at like the last school that was really ahead of its time, this school, in terms of genuine, true inclusion. And it's really funny, Debbie, I still remember like one of the hardest experiences I've had of my life was as a 16-year-old walking into that like school ground and walking up to a bunch of teenagers that I didn't know and like saying hello and introducing myself. I don't think I would have finished school and would be on a different path if I hadn't have gone to that school. And they just accepted me for who I was and stopped fighting me and just said, this is the stuff that you need to do. We'll help you do it. If you don't submit it or can't submit it, you won't be punished. We won't come down on you. We'll just think about, are you getting enough support? Things like that. And so I didn't understand that. I hadn't experienced that before. And it was just amazing. And then I just had this really slow change in the narrative around me where I got to have success in those interactions and relationships and all that stuff. And it was really beautiful. And I spend more time in clinic thinking about how do I change the narrative around kids than I do writing scripts, giving diagnoses. That's the stuff that's not as powerful as how do I shift the story that's around this kid? Because I really believe the story you hear about yourself is a big part of who you become. And I was very lucky that that story changed for me because I meet lots of kids that it hasn't.
Yeah, for sure. Was that experience that you went through being seen finally and accepted for who you are and changing that narrative? Did you kind of instantly know, okay, I really want to help other kids like me? Is that what pulled you in that direction?
No, I think it's a powerful thing, but I think I'm still a little bit insecure about all that. I think a lot of us that have had those experiences, it never leaves us. You know, it's a bit philosophical, but I still think I'm looking for myself in clinic, you know, like I'm thinking about who are the kids out there, especially my mum. I just couldn't help her then. She had really significant mental illness and really struggled with things. And I was aware of that as a teenager and I didn't really know what to do and I felt really helpless. And I think a lot of that motivation for me to skill up in like really serious mental illness in kids and parents is me trying to make up for not being able to help then or the kids that I am. I was then really lucky that I went to a childcare centre, like as I was a little kid, outside of school hours and holidays and all that kind of stuff. I hated it. Like I just wanted to be with my mum. My mum worked 3 jobs and one of the things I feel guilty about is looking back and thinking that I gave her such a hard time about how much she worked as a kid. But I ended up working at that childcare centre for 6 years and it was this beautiful experience because this disadvantaged community, like lots of kids that are really struggling. And I just got to hone being with kids and playing with kids and understanding who they are and all that stuff. And I reckon I learnt more in that 6 years than my embarrassingly long 14 years of full-time university. Those opportunities to just be with kids and struggle with them and butt heads with them and try and be an authority and fail at it, all of that stuff was really powerful for me. But I also knew I couldn't be a teacher. I think teachers are amazing, but I was drawn to science. So I went and did science and then medicine and then went and did a subspecialty in developmental pediatrics and then met all these kids again. It was beautiful because it took me back to that playground, but I wasn't able to spend as much time with these kids or be as big a part of their life, but I had other ways that I could try and help them. And it's just this amazing feeling. Like, I hope you feel like that with all the work you do as well. But I made the mistake of saying to a kid the other day, a gorgeous teenager who's been really, really struggling, has been kicked out of school and is really butting heads with everything. He's a gorgeous kid. And I made the mistake when I said goodbye to him the other day. I was like, it's been so nice to spend time with you. I can't believe I get paid to do this. Because I've just been talking to him and learning who he is and what he cares about and what he's good at and all of that stuff. It's pretty amazing. Yeah, I guess the other thing about what you said is I'm not sure that I'm some exceptional role model, but I think that because I'm a doctor, I don't think that makes me any better. I'm just trying to get better at my own parenting. I've got this real privilege that I get to every day think about it from a scientific lens, trying to be a good partner, trying to contribute to the community. And give more to it than I take from it and all of that stuff. And I fail at that almost every day, but I'm really lucky that that's what I work in. So I get to be the so-called expert that comes home and has the same struggles that everyone else does.
Yeah, I mean, as you're saying that, I think too, in your book, and we'll get into your book in a little bit, but you talk so openly about your experience as a dad of these two young ones and your journey. It's kind of like you are narrating or rewriting your own story for all of us. You're kind of learning through this and you're sharing your learning with us as you go along.
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny, there's bits in the book. I had to read the audiobook with a guy who was like a bit of a older, cranky, gruff, blokey bloke. He was pretty harsh and pretty hard to connect with at the start. But I get quite emotional in the audiobook and he just kind of went with me a bit and he really softened up over the days that I was reading it. And he's kind of I don't think we should take that bit out because I'd stumble through it emotionally a bit because, I talk about my own kids. I talk about these amazing kids that I've had the privilege of meeting over the last 20 years, what I learned from them, what helped guide them and all that stuff. But yeah, it's a big part of it is my journey. How do I guide these two little kids that I've got? Knowing everything I know, how do I do it? And I certainly don't do it perfectly, but how can I kind of share what I'm learning so that someone who's also struggling with a tantrum or severe anxiety or whatever can think, well, this is how you practically apply the evidence. This is what they do in clinic. If you get to that 2.5-year wait list, a lot of the book is me pulling my hair out that families wait so long to see me. And then I'll say something and then I'll say it again later that day. And I just think this is wild. You shouldn't have waited this long to hear someone explain co-regulation to you or whatever the thing is that I'm talking about. Yeah, it's really amazing. But yeah, my own kids are constantly reminding me that there's a difference between the textbooks and real life.
I can totally relate to that. Let's take a quick break and we'll get into some more of the concepts. One of the most frequent topics in the Tilt parenting community is how to navigate our kids' education and school, because we all want to set our kids up for creating a life they love. And that means making sure they're receiving the best education. And by best, I mean one that's right for them and their unique needs. I highly recommend checking out K-12 Powered Schools. K-12 Powered Schools can help your child start reaching their full potential in life now with online education options tailored to their unique needs, interests, and schedules. And there's still time to get started this year. K-12 Powered Schools are tuition-free, online accredited public schools for kindergarten through 12th grade. And this is not your typical homeschooling where parents are responsible for teaching their children. K-12 Powered Schools have state-certified teachers trained in online education and features an online portal that gives parents daily insights into curriculum and performance. And K-12's hands-on innovative technology makes learning interactive and engaging, helping your child gain skills, experience, and certifications all before graduating high school, all while giving you the support you need to get them there. K-12 has online education options for every type of learner, and it could be the right fit for your child too. Help your child gain the skills they need to thrive in the future with K-12. There's still time to get started for the fall. Go to k12.com/tilt today to learn more and find a tuition-free K-12 powered school near you. That's the letter K, the number 12.com/tilt. K12.com/tilt. As summer winds down and I kick off a new podcast production season, that means I'm spending many hours prepping for and interviewing guests. I'm finding that the time to shop for and prepare well-balanced meals is slipping through my fingers. That's exactly why I'm so thankful for HelloFresh. HelloFresh can help you save time this fall by making dinner easier and faster than ever. Skip the meal planning and those last-minute grocery store runs with easy-to-follow recipes and pre-portioned ingredients delivered fresh to your door. Just choose your delivery day, open your box, and start cooking. Or, in my case, get your husband to start cooking. HelloFresh also has something for everyone in the family. Their line of kid-friendly options means even the pickiest of eaters will be part of the Clean Plate Club this back-to-school season. And Green Chef, another sponsor of the show, is now owned by HelloFresh. And I love switching between the brands to enjoy an even wider selection of meal plans. And now my listeners can enjoy both brands at a discount with me. And for a limited time, kids eat free. Go to HelloFresh.com/tiltkids to unlock this exclusive offer. 1 free kids meal per box for 2 months while your subscription is active. That's free kids meals just by going to HelloFresh.com/tiltkids. HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
I do want to ask one question if you're okay going there. Just in terms of Australia, you've mentioned a couple times this 2.5-year wait list. I'm in the EU now. Things are very different here, and I need to kind of re-immerse myself into the process here. In the US, 6 months to 12 months wait list to get services or an evaluation. We do have a lot of listeners in Australia, and I'm just kind of wondering, based on your travels and your learning, any insights you could share with us about the state of things in Australia, and maybe even if you feel comfortable answering this specifically within like the neurodivergent space. Do you have thoughts on where Australia is in that movement?
So yeah, in terms of the situation at the moment, yeah, we've got pretty bad wait lists all around the country where our rates of mental illness diagnostically between 4 and 17 years of age is 1 in 7 or 14%, that's kind of meeting clinical criteria. It's pretty high and concerning. We know disadvantaged communities or communities that are experiencing diversity have much higher rates as well. In terms of access to support is really difficult. There's a couple of different systems that exist in Australia, but essentially to see a specialist is quite hard. Our equivalent of family physicians or general practitioners see the most of these kids, and even they only see 35% of them. Myself, a psychologist, sees 24% of them. Pediatricians, general and developmental, see 21% of them. And child psychiatrists only see 7% of kids in Australia with clinical mental illness. So, it's really, really hard. About half of kids with mental illness never get seen, which is pretty scary about what we know about early intervention and correct identification, support and therapy and all those things. In terms of neurodiversity, I think we've still got a really long way to go. I think that, schools and communities are trying to get better at it and trying to understand how do we be sensitive to the individual and unique needs of every child and every parent and every person in our community. I think the thing that and I'd actually really love to hear what you think about this, Debbie, but I think true inclusion, especially when it comes to neurodiversity, can falsely seem as this kindness that we should give to people. But actually, it's a really selfish thing because we are missing out on the strengths of people in our community by not giving them opportunities to have avenues and expressions of that and pathways for success. And I don't know how comfortable you feel talking about it, but I think you've got really powerful voice in this space about what does true inclusion actually look like, because superficial inclusion is potentially harmful. If you show kids that you're safe in a space or that you're welcome here and then they're not, they lose faith and trust in people that say that. And so, I need to spend more time doing it as well, but all of us need to listen more. I'm really lucky that I get to be a part of a lot of kids' lives that are experiencing those challenges and try and lighten that load for them. But yeah, I think all of us, I don't know how you feel about the States and now Europe, but I think we've still got a long way to go until we're actually unlocking the real potential of our community.
I absolutely agree. And it's interesting. I just released an episode a month or two ago about the state of the neurodiversity movement, just reflecting on the past 20 years. And there has been so much progress in so many ways. And there's still so much work to be done. I think the US is probably ahead of the curve. Having lived there and experienced what's happening there, that's a hard pill to swallow. You're like, okay, so we're ahead of the curve. There's still a lot of problems here. I definitely believe that we all lose, right? When neurodivergent people aren't truly included and seen and celebrated for who they are and what they can contribute to the world. They lose because they don't get to have fully realized lives where their gifts can be shared and they can contribute to the world. And we all lose because we know that they have so much to offer. So yeah, I think it's kind of like a shift, right? Inclusion on paper, It's like, okay, you can come into our classroom and maybe we'll support you in this, or that way. But true inclusion, I think, involves the people in power in systems, right? Actually believing that neurodivergence isn't a deficit, right? And it's just a different way of being. And that right there is such a fundamental shift. And it often takes a personal experience. It takes knowing someone and experiencing what it's really like, whether it's their own child or someone in their family, to be like, oh, I get it now. But until it impacts someone really directly, I think it's hard for people to really make that shift.
Yeah, you're so right. Like, we know one of the most powerful things that schools can do is like tell stories about this stuff and have powerful narratives about what the experience is like. And the other thing is, like, our similarities bind us. And just because there's a difference in height or something like that, we don't say, well, I can't be friends with you or I can't relate to you. And so what we've got to realize is that there's so much we share, all of us together. The hard thing is that's really vulnerable. And I always worry that I'm overusing self-disclosure, but I try on the podcast and in the book to tell my own story to try and make someone else feel okay that's experiencing the same thing, the same insecurity about, am I going to be a good parent? Am I actually helping? Is this all about my ego? Whatever it is, so that someone else goes, oh, cool, I'm not alone in thinking like that or feeling like that. And I think that's the trick with inclusion, is like, there is actually lots of common ground, but I think sometimes we get stuck in like the difference and conflict and uncertainty. And I think that's where a lot of the negative experiences come from, is like, I'm not sure, I don't understand that, so I'll be hostile. Instead of, I'll try and learn about it and see, do I grow because I learn about that? Am I actually need to have a better, different perspective about things and all that stuff? And yeah, I do this every day, and I'll stop doing it when I think I have figured it all out. As from every perspective, isn't it? Like reflective practice, once again, a powerful tool you use in your book. Just reflecting on things is really important, and thinking about, am I genuinely inclusive? Are we a genuinely inclusive community? Is there a diversity of voice in our collective conversation? Like, it's really important. But I also hope I'm not an unrealistic idealist, but I'm really optimistic that we will keep getting better at this. You must feel the same. The young kids coming up now are just amazing. They're so much better than I was when I was a teenager. So I think there's some beautiful stuff that's happening. We've just got to make sure that also we create space for them.
That's exactly right. I couldn't agree with you more, especially on this generation.
Yeah. And so does that give you hope? Do you find yourself optimistic because of that?
Yeah, I overall am optimistic. I really am. And I often say this, it might be who I'm hanging out with, because I am like spending a lot of time with people who are very committed to this. And I know that you met with Mona Delahook, and she's someone who I think her contributions over the past 5-10 years have completely changed the conversation. I see so much hope and the neuroscience and what we're learning. And I do think, to bring up this younger generation, they don't like stand for any bull crap. You know what I mean? Like, I think that once they really step into their power, things can change pretty quickly, and they just don't see stigma the same way. They often self-disclose, like without shame. They kind of own who they are. And I do think that, as this generation gets older and gets into these systems, that change can happen pretty quickly.
Yeah, totally. And I think, one of the funny things is that I often on podcasts, I don't know if you get this, but get asked like, kids these days are too soft. Everyone's on top of them too much. They should be out there running around on their own. And I'm like, look where that got us. Look at the adult mental health in the community, how much loneliness there is, how much clinical depression and anxiety and complete social isolation and insecure self-esteem. We need to be more gentle and more careful and providing more guidance and support to kids. And also, like what the evidence shows us, including Mona and Tina and Dan and everyone who's created it, is that warmth always comes first. To help someone grow, you have to start with warmth and you have to connect with them. And that's why this like tough love, it's not possible to have tough love. They're the opposites. And I just think that if you start with every kid feeling like they're unconditionally supported and loved, that doesn't mean they can get away with whatever they want to do. That just means I will unconditionally, unquestionably be here by your side, whatever happens, whatever your behavior is, whatever comes towards you. And they feel safe and secure then. And then you can move towards things about how can I guide you towards a better behavior? How can I help you understand the perspective of others? How can I help you not feel like you're socially isolated? How can I help you express all the things you're passionate about and good at? But if you don't start there, you're hitting your head against a wall and often blaming the child, thinking, why are you not better at this? I've told you so many times.
Yeah. And then the shame cycle begins, and then, away we go.
Yeah, there's few things that are as harmful as shame to all of us, and it's very different to guilt. And it's an important distinction that we shouldn't never challenge who kids are, and we should always separate their behaviour from who they are. And including in success, I see lots of kids in clinic that have so much fragility because the only thing that they identify as is the one thing they're really good at. We just praise kids too much for you're the fastest, you're the best at the sport, you're the smartest. And there's a huge vulnerability in that, because if they feel like their love and their identity and everything is tied to that, then they're really vulnerable to when they're not the smartest or they're not the fastest or whatever it is. And it's tough, but it's just, that unconditional love and support is often the most helpful thing that we can make kids genuinely feel.
I want to be sure we talk about your book a bit, so let's take a quick break and then we'll do that.
Are you overwhelmed by the things that get in the way of you doing what you want to do? Are you looking for ways to simplify life to better align with your values? Do you want to create space in your schedule so you have room for more of the good stuff? Play, joy, relationships, gratitude, and more? If you answered yes to any of these questions, I invite you to check out Edit Your Life, a podcast to help you edit the unnecessary from your life so you have more room to enjoy the awesome. Through episodes with me, Christine Coe, and a range of super smart, compassionate, and thoughtful guests, you'll come away with big picture insights and practical ways to declutter your home, schedule, and mental space without getting bogged down by perfection. I have always believed that small moments and actions matter tremendously. My goal is to help you find agency and space in your life through doable baby steps that will leave you feeling accomplished instead of overwhelmed. Check out Edit Your Life wherever you enjoy your podcasts.
Feel like you're the martyr in your family? You're not alone. Hey, this is Joanne.
And Bree.
And we're from the No Guilt Mom podcast. Bree, we talk to a lot of moms.
Yeah, we sure do.
And if you're a mom who has a to-do list that is so massive that you get overwhelmed and you shut down,
or if you fall into the habit of doing everything for everyone and don't know how to change it, we can help you become a no-guilt mom.
we're going to take you from family martyr to family model. That's role model, so that you role model the behavior that you want to see out of your kids.
You're going to go from being tired and overwhelmed to energized and guilt-free.
Every week, you'll get actionable strategies that you can implement right away from the experts that we interview and from us.
We also have a whole lot of fun, so check out the No Guilt Mom podcast everywhere you listen to your favorite shows.
Lynn, this time of year, parenting can be such a flusterclux.
You've come to the right place. I'm Lynn Lyons, and I've been treating anxious families for over 30 years.
I'm Lynn's sister-in-law and co-host Robin Hudson.
Join us for Flusterclux, a podcast for parents who worry.
Wait, that's everybody.
Yeah, these last few years have felt like one long anxiety attack for so many.
Why do you think parents are always surprised that a podcast about anxiety relates to them, even if no one in their house has an anxiety disorder?
Well, worry is human. Everyone does it, and anxiety shows up when we face uncertainty.
All the parenting tips you've taught me have been essential.
I love to break it down into skills we need to manage worry in our families.
We've covered so many topics: depression, burnout, meltdowns, perfectionism.
Don't forget scary mothers-in-law.
Right, but of course that's not my mother-in-law.
Because that's my mother.
And a listener.
As a psychotherapist, I like to teach parents and kids how to respond to everyday moments in healthy ways.
Managing anxiety really can be taught.
It really can, and I'll even tell you what to say.
We talk about serious stuff, but without being too serious.
Anxiety wants everything serious. Anxiety doesn't stand a chance when we're laughing, even about the tough stuff.
In the beginning of your book, you're talking about the fellowship, and you were in this interview process, and the fellowship is what kind of led to this book. And you said that he said, "We've read your application, and frankly, I don't believe there's any evidence that how we raise our children impacts their mental health. Please explain yourself." And I read that and I was like, oh my gosh, this is someone in a position of power and decision making. And so you said that that's the question that you went in search of answers for. And so can you just talk about that a little bit?
There's so much that we can influence. That's the huge risk, but the beauty in being a part of these kids' lives is that there's so much. And I think that if we think about two really big components about a child in their development is their attachment and their temperament. And their temperament, we can often pick their temperament. We run an unsettled babies clinic that looks after little bubs that are struggling. It's our only clinic that has a short wait list, and we work really hard to keep it like that. But often these kids, as they're approaching 1 year of age, will be showing us they have a sensitive temperament. They're vulnerable to big experiences in the world, reacting and struggling with novelty and all of those things that the people where I'm very lucky, and you know even better than me, have done a lot of work in this space. And that kind of stays with us, that sensitivity. But we know that attachment changes. And I think that the trick is, how do I match the needs of my child to their temperament? But how do I always ensure that I'm trying to make them feel like they have secure attachment? And if there's a challenge to it, I repair it. So there's kind of this one bit that we have to adjust and change all the time. And it's a moving target, you know what I mean? As kids get older, the needs of that sensitive temperament change. And Thomas Boyce, you know, is amazing in this space about these kids who have sensitive temperaments, he calls them the orchids, are not doomed, just like my kids are not doomed because I have a history of mental illness. It actually gives me an opportunity to be sensitive to their needs. And the sensitivity of the environment means that when kids with a sensitive temperament have warm, responsive, predictable, unconditional love that is sensitive to their needs, they thrive and they bloom and they do so well. And the resilient kind of dandelions don't move much either way compared to them. The orchids, I meet a lot of them in clinic, they're much harder to parent. But I think once you get the guidance on understanding that sensitivity, it's really powerful. And attachment is not set in stone when you're a little kid either. You know, feeling secure in the world and that you're deserving of the love you receive is something that's important to me now. So I think kind of understanding just how we feel about ourselves is built in the relationships that we share. In the early years, it's primary caregivers, but as we go through school, it's the interactions we have with peers, it's our educators, it's, you know, there's even powerful evidence that shows one really protective, positive childhood experience is having two non-parental adults that have a genuine interest in you. And so how can we think about the kids in our community and think about who is there out there that I can support, I can really learn about and care about and be involved in what they're passionate about, what their fears are, supporting them, showing them that they brighten up my life, they enrich our school community, they're a powerful part of our community traditions. Like that stuff changes kids' lives. And when we understand that, and if we have to, we pull weight off the vegetables or the homework or, you know, the other needs, which are way less important, it sometimes gives us the room to prioritize that. And I've sat in clinic all day today and I've had some mums cry. I've had some dads finally let their frustration out and all these things. And almost every family, we've agreed as they've left that the priority is just experiencing joy with that kid. And some of them are really playing up. Some of them are really antisocial behaviour. Some of them are really struggling. They're behaving in ways that their parents want to pull their hair out. But that's the important bit, is that how does that kid feel really safe and secure in that relationship, feel like they're really celebrated and they're genuinely valued specifically for who they are? Like that's the stuff that influences and changes it. The biggest predictor of adult mental illness is developmental trauma. Those experiences that, once again, I was lucky to spend time with Bruce Perry, those experiences stunt development, and those are things that if they're not addressed and repaired, we can hold for the rest of our life. The evidence shows that 50% of adult mental illness starts in your childhood. So how do we identify early that those kids who are struggling and put in really rich protective factors for everyone? And the kids that are showing early signs and setting up flares, how do we go to them then and meet them with what they need and give them that support? And I love what I do in clinic, but it's every single kid I've ever met in clinic, and I've probably met 15,000 or more, I've wished I met them earlier, because there is so much we can do. I'm never stuck about what to do. I'm always stuck about, I wish I'd met you earlier. That's why the book and the podcast and all this stuff exists, because I can see them one at a time and see them 14 a day. And I'm really lucky I get to train other specialists and other professionals in the community. But how do we get to people sooner? How do we show them, like bullying, whatever it is, there's a lot of evidence about this, but people are just a bit lost about how to do it. But the people that have the trusted relationships are the most powerful people. And I'm not really one of them. That's the people in the community that know everyone intimately. And every single community I've ever been to, I'm really lucky that I've traveled around a bit, has people that you can tap them on the shoulder and say, I'm drowning, and that person will help. We've lost a lot of that because of the pandemic, and a lot of families feel really isolated out from that. But that's the stuff that we should reinforce, and that's how you influence a child's developmental trajectory, make them feel like they're a part of something and that they're valued.
And you talked about attachment. And one of the things I just want to see if you can share with listeners, because we hear about attachment, we've talked about it on the show before, and you said that it's never too late to identify and work on issues with attachment. And I thought that's an important thing to emphasize, because I know that there are parents who blame themselves for a child who's dysregulated. They wonder if it's because they did have this term unsettled, I had never heard before, but this unsettled baby who was really hard to soothe and to nurture. And so maybe that parent was like, I need a break. And now does my child have insecure attachment? And is it too late? And so I think there's a lot of fear around attachment. And so it is something then that, if a child had insecure attachment as a younger person, that they can cultivate as a child and a young adult?
Yeah, definitely. I meet teenagers in clinic who are 17, 18 years of age who are hostile, think the world is against them, relationships are transactional, they're insecure, they completely shut everyone out, or at any sign of difficulty or risk to relationship, they become really hostile and act out, and sometimes really aggressively. And those kids need to go back to the core principles of, you are loved, you are supported, you are valued, and help them feel secure in the world again. And that's where we fall down. Like Australia's having a hard time with this at the moment, of these really punitive measures. We need to drop the age of being able to incarcerate kids because they're out there stealing cars or doing whatever. And we don't think, what does this kid actually need to succeed? Where is this coming from? These parents need more support. I meet families, and there'll be similar systems in your country, like in Holland where you are now, but in the States as well. I meet families that come and see me because Child Protection has said you need to see someone. And sometimes that kid has been out of their care. And I still see those kids transition and journey back to a place where they're loved, and that parent is a hugely positive part of their life, because every single parent out there is trying their hardest. It's just that a lot of us are carrying way more weight in our own childhood experiences, our own mental illness, the other burdens we experience in our life, domestic violence, household dysfunction, whatever's happening with us. But I've never, ever met a kid that I'm like, oh, it's too late. Yeah, I think it's a really powerful point about if you are ever reading something or listening to something or thinking, I've stuffed things up, you haven't. It's always repairable. Once again, you talk about this. You just lean in and be led by the child and think about, what does this kid in front of me need? How can I do it gently and consistently and predictably, sensitively? And because they won't, just because we decide, they're not going to go, oh, okay, cool, this is where everything's turning around. But with time, they can see us as a safe harbour that they can come to, and that celebrates them when they leave us as well, which is essentially circle of security in attachment theory.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, everything you shared about attachment. And that actually is very comforting, I think, to know and to hear about teenagers, that can be impacted. And it made me think of another chapter in your book, which I wanted to bring up. But before I do that, I haven't actually even said the name of your book. And I want to do that now. And of course, listeners, it'll be in the show notes. But the book that Billy's written is called 10 Things I Wish You Knew About Your Child's Mental Health. It's kind of like hanging out with a wise father, doctor. It's very story-based. You take these kind of 10 top concepts, I guess, that you felt these are the really key pieces for supporting our kids and growing up into adults who can thrive. And you write about them with gentleness, accessibility. You share stories from clinic, which I thought were so powerful, but you also share these personal stories of your life as a parent and your 2 young children. So there was a chapter in here on self-esteem, which I really appreciated as well. That's something that comes up a lot in my community. So many of our kids, because of messages they've gotten over time, that there's something wrong with who they inherently are. They have been identified as the bad kid. Maybe they've been bullied, maybe they've been ostracized. So that becomes part of their story, and they do have lower self-esteem. And you talk about this concept of stable self-esteem as kind of what we're working towards. And I was wondering if you could share what that is.
Yeah, so I think we get a little bit lost sometimes with self-esteem, and we think that we want high self-esteem. And actually, like high self-esteem, if we think back to when we were kids, that were those like jocks that walked around, or the people that were really full of themselves. But often they had fragile self-esteem. And a lot of kids who are the bullies actually have a fragility in their self-esteem. And one of the reasons that they bully is to reinforce that power imbalance and say, I'm more powerful than these people. I need to keep reinforcing that to feel okay about myself. And when we work on their self-esteem, it can be a really powerful thing. So what we're actually aiming for is secure self-esteem. I can take on feedback. I see it as an opportunity for growth. I don't need to win everything. I don't constantly need reassurance. I'm not like hostile when other people get attention. I'm not kind of over clingy and catastrophizing and thinking about those things and highly reactive that people will abandon us. And that gets built through childhood. Once again, it's never too late. But it gets built through childhood, through the experiences of success and growth at the things you're invested in and are passionate about, and the relationships that celebrate those things and also share our failures with us as well. It's a really important thing. The last kid that I saw today is a beautiful kid in his early teens who has ADHD. We got some teacher feedback for him, and he's like this sporty kid, but he cried in the clinic because he just doesn't feel like he's good enough. You know, he's failing at school. He's struggling. He's trying really hard, but he's really distractible. He can't focus, and he just doesn't want to be there anymore. And me and Mum spoke about how important his self-esteem is as the priority now, because the way he values himself is influenced by how he feels others do. And there's just been too much of a focus on all the things he's not good at. We're trying to explore how can he experience success every day in his life about the things that matter to him and he cares about. And it's hard because his mum's like trying to take him to all these different sports and trying to do all these different things with him, but he's kind of losing motivation. His mood is really suffering because of it. And I care way more about like that kid's self-esteem than anything else, because I need to try and repair that and guide those that are actually doing all the work, his family, his teachers, about how they do that with him. And it starts by thinking about how most of his interactions in this home and most of his interactions in this classroom, successful ones. This is not a time of stretch. This is not a time of pressure and growth. This is a time of you succeed. And that's, all of us need that. We all need that. Like, that's where secure self-esteem comes from.
Yeah, so it's not like our kids' self-esteem is built by these huge things like winning the science fair or whatever, but it's more of having that like bank account where you're always just putting in little deposits through these little interactions. I think we can get mixed up on what actually contributes to a stable self-esteem.
Yeah, and in clinic, every single kid that I meet, I ask them 2 questions. And the first is, what do you find fun? And the second is, what are you good at? And they're really 2 important metrics for me, because kids should have specific answers for both of those things. You know, they are triggers for me to think. If they don't have any, if they genuinely can't say there's anything they find joyful, I worry that there's something going on in terms of their mood. And mood being bigger than emotions, mood being a stretch over time of how they feel about the world and themselves. And then, you know, when they can't answer what are you good at with specific examples, I worry a lot about their self-esteem. every kid should have multiple different specific answers to both of those questions.
Yeah, I read that question in your book and it really struck me. Such a simple question, but can provide such important information depending on what the answer is.
Yeah, those two questions, how do we reinforce that every day for kids that have answers to them? And for those that don't, how do we find them? It's hard, but creating the space and protecting that time is really important for kids.
You have a chapter in the book. It's the second to last chapter. It's called Bad Kids. First of all, I completely related to so much in that chapter, both as someone who was, a quote unquote bad kid in her own way as a young person, but just in my work in this community. What I really appreciated and wanted to touch upon in this conversation is you said that in your experience, there are two diagnoses where the benefit never comes close to the risk. And you talk about oppositional defiance disorder and conduct disorder. You said these are two diagnoses I've never made and I hope I never have to. I just would love to touch upon that because those are certainly labels and diagnoses that many listeners have had, including me. I think ours was disruptive behavioral disorder, not otherwise specified at some point. I'm like, what even is that? And there's a sense that the parents have really screwed up, right? That's the vibe when a child gets kind of labeled with this. It's like, well, it's the parents' fault. And over the years, I've come to think, similarly, like these labels don't mean anything. What are we doing here? They're not a diagnosis. So could you talk about that?
Yeah, definitely. And, the DSM-5 has a pretty awful history of some pretty horrific things that it pathologized. So my job is to share all my skills and families and opportunities that I might be able to help, and families guide me. They're the more powerful person in the room when I meet them in clinic, and I will ask every family when they come and see me, what's the priority? How can I be helpful? And sometimes it is about, is there a diagnosis here? And I diagnose kids with lots of conditions such as ADHD and autism and anxiety and those type of things. But I do it really carefully, and I do it when it's the right thing to do by the kid in front of me. It's going to actually help people provide more purposeful, accurate support to put around them, and that it won't risk their self-esteem and their identity, and also create this false ceiling around them that, well, he's got that thing, so we're not going to expect, we're not going to include him, we're not going to give him opportunities because of that diagnosis that's been made. So it's really tricky. Some people don't understand why we can't just look at a kid once and go, well, how come you can't just diagnose them straight away? And because, anyone that does that, I'd be worried that they're not actually thinking about it really carefully. We also know that a lot of these kids have comorbidities. There's 40 to 60% of these kids that have one of those diagnoses will have another, including conduct disorder and oppositional defiance disorder. And I see heaps of kids that have been given that diagnosis. The reason I don't give it is because I find that the benefit is way lower than the cost. These kids get labelled and they miss out on lots of opportunities because people have low expectations of them, or they write their destiny for them and say, well, he'll be lucky if you get a job. I was like that. I remember they were like, I got told you'll be lucky if you have a job. The risk in that is so big. And like what you're talking about, oppositional defiant disorder and conduct disorder is a collection of signs that the child is demonstrating. It gives you nothing about the reason. It doesn't explain it at all. ADHD helps us because we think this is executive function. This kid is really good at thinking quickly, at thinking creatively, at seeing stuff in environments that we don't see. They might struggle to focus on something that they find quite boring and not interesting, especially if it's in an environment that doesn't harness the things that they find challenging. Oppositional defiant disorder and conduct disorder give us almost none of that guidance. They just say this kid is hostile and aggressive and violent and won't listen and do all these things. But every time I meet one of those kids, I think, why? Why is this child like this? This kid, no kid in the world wakes up and goes, I want to be oppositional to the world today. I want to be defiant. I want to be antisocial. There's a reason. And when you find that reason and be curious about it, and genuinely curious, not judgmentally curious, but curious about why, that's the path out of it. When we identify that in those kids that have been given that diagnosis, we should take those diagnoses away and say, actually, what we've realized is your self-esteem was insecure. You've been traumatized by this experience that's happened. You have been severely bullied, and now you just act out and lash out and want to burn the school down. And we need to repair that damage that's been done, show you you're safe, and take that diagnosis away. It's one of the best things that I get to do is meet those kids, and I love meeting them. And people think I'm crazy, but I love meeting those kids, you know, and it once again goes back to the start of the conversation. I'm probably looking for myself in clinic a bit. But if there's one thing that we can do, and this is, I can't do this all the time personally, I can do it professionally pretty much all the time. I reckon I must hit 60, 70% of the time at home, is when a kid is struggling, just thinking why. I wonder what's going on for this kid in front of me. If they're answering back or swearing or telling us to get stuffed or on the ground throwing their hands up and down and screaming at us or whatever, thinking, I wonder what's happening. I wonder why this kid is struggling so much. And if you can be genuinely curious, it's one of the most powerful things that we can do for kids. It also helps. It's like I talk about this in the book, but I try not to say it's okay to my kids, you know, mainly my daughter, when she falls over or is having a tantrum or whatever. And I just say, I'm here, because it might not be okay. And I don't want to dismiss how she's feeling, but I also need to remind myself my role is to be here with you in this experience that you're having, and think about, is there something going on that I can actually help so that you're not experiencing this distress? And that's the same for the teenager that's like antisocial, stealing cars, trying to burn the school down. What's going on and why is this happening, and how can I actually repair it and heal it? Very easy to say, but it takes a lot for it to do, but it's really powerful to experience that journey with kids.
It's a great note to wrap this up on. Again, listeners, the book is called 10 Things I Wish You Knew About Your Child's Mental Health by Dr. Billy Garvey. I'll have links in the show notes page. I highly recommend you check it out. At the moment, it's only available in Australia. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. So Penguin, who are amazing, but we're just, the book is really a reach tool, like the podcast, trying to get support and evidence into communities. And what we're hoping is that there's a way to partner with a publisher or someone overseas who actually has avenues. And so we're still exploring those opportunities. And if we can't find them, we'll probably just start sending it ourselves as the social enterprise.
Yeah. And for listeners who want to kind of dive in right now, who don't have access to the book, I really recommend you check out Billy's podcast. It's called Pop Culture Parenting. It's so good. I went down a rabbit hole and started listening. I just listened to an episode where you talk about co-regulation and Jurassic Park, and it was so brilliant. And it's such a powerful way to explain really complex concepts in a way that, I don't know, it resonates.
Yeah, like the biggest influence on how we parent is how we were parented, but also our cultural references that we grew up with and influences. And we grew up with these movies about being a man is being tough and just not showing your feelings, or different types of things like that. I can use these influences on us, and then I pick apart a scene and think about what the evidence would look like. And the neurodiversity one in Blade Runner was one that was really important to me. I was really worried I was going to stuff it up, and people thought it was helpful. And the other one is Forrest Gump and Kids Who Are Different, was just based off a single email that got sent into us. So the best thing about the podcast is the community. And we know we've got listeners in the States and in Europe, and we adore them. And the best thing about it is all the listeners, because I do the movie thing and explain the theory to one of my best mates who's also a parent. And then the part 2, we get hundreds and hundreds of questions coming in about how do you actually do co-regulation? You know, how do you actually support self-esteem? We use Pretty Woman, which is such an amazing movie, and Thelma and Louise for mental health first aid. We built a curriculum around a national course for that. And then I just went, I'm going to do it as a movie and podcast topic. And Thelma and Louise is amazing, because that kind of unconditional partnership and support about 2 people that are going through real genuine adversity and hardship. So yeah, thank you for sharing that as well, Debbie, because yours is amazing too.
Very different vibe. I think yours is more entertaining, and I'm a pop culture junkie, so I appreciate that. So listeners, I'll have links in the show notes for the episodes that Billy just mentioned, so you can check them out. So first of all, thank you. I want to thank you for everything you shared today and congratulate you on the fellowship and your work. And I feel like it's so important that you are where you are doing the work you're doing. It's making such an impact.
Yeah, thank you. But I'm really conscious of you and Tina and all these people that it means a lot to me, because a big part of why I'm sitting here is because of all the work you've done, but also just the fact that you were happy to connect.
Well, I was happy to connect, but thank you. Here's to future collaboration. So I will let you get on with your evening, and thank you again for everything you shared today. It was great to hang out with you and chat.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Debbie. It was really nice to have a chat with you.
You've been listening to the Tilt Parenting Podcast. To learn more about today's guest and the resources we talked about, check out the extensive show notes page on Tilt Parenting. There you'll find key takeaways, links to all the resources mentioned, and even a full transcript of our conversation. Just go to tiltparenting.com/podcast and select this episode. If you're looking for personal support from me and connection with a phenomenal community of parents raising neurodivergent kids, join us in the recently rebooted Differently Wired Club. The new Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Go to tiltparenting.com/club to learn more. The Tilt Parenting Podcast is hosted by me, Debbie Reber, author of Differently Wired and the founder of Tilt Parenting, and was edited by Andrea Curtis Amasquita. To support this show, please join my Patreon campaign, where you can set up a small monthly contribution. Just go to patreon.com/tiltparenting to learn more. If you want to follow Tilt on social media, you can find us at @tiltparenting on Instagram and Facebook. And lastly, please take a minute to leave a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. That helps this show stay visible so others can find it more easily. And that's all for this week. Stay safe, stay well, and take good care. And for more information about any of the parenting resources Tilt offers, visit tiltparenting.com.
Are you a parent in need of a laugh and a little escape? Look no further. Parenting is a Joke is the podcast you've been waiting for. Hey, I'm Ophira Eisenberg. I'm a stand-up comic and parent. And each week I chat with one of my top comedian pals who, just like you, are juggling careers, busy lives and schedules, and raising a family. You can expect candid stories, hilarious mishaps that happen on stage and at home, and just a lot of laughs. There's no expert advice here. Well, actually, sometimes a good idea does sneak its way in, but mostly just pure, relatable fun to remind you that we're all in this parenting adventure together. New episodes of Parenting is a Joke drop every Tuesday, so tune in, get ready to laugh, unwind, and maybe even feel a little bit better about your own parenting. Because sometimes that's exactly what your therapist, pediatrician, and bartender ordered. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform.